You're listening to the Book Talk Today podcast, a podcast that inspires readers to obtain valuable insights to inform, educate, and improve lives. My name is Orn Abdi. I'm an avid reader, best known for the creation of the 1 Minute Book Review community, and I'm sitting down with authors to delve deeper into the books they have written to uncover the story behind the story. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 17 of the Book Talk Today podcast. Today, we are joined by Phil Bowne. Phil is a writer for the Wombles, a children's entertainment brand, and Phil is here to discuss his debut novel, Cows Can't Jump. Phil, it's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So, Phil reached out to me a couple of weeks ago to send me the book, and as listeners know, I'm a big non-fiction advocate. So it was nice to be sent a fiction book with a lovely, interesting title. I posted a photo last weekend on my 1 Minute Book Review page, and people are like, "Oh, Cows Can't Jump sounds interesting." They're like, "Okay, what non-fiction book is that?" And I'm like, "It's not a non-fiction book. It's not like a science book on cows or anything."
No, it's not going to go into like farming or it's not got much to do with cows at all, actually.
You do have an interesting promo though that I recommend people go watch on your website, where you're sat amongst cows. I thought it was a great promo for a book.
That was actually really terrifying because I didn't realize how dangerous cows are. And we kind of went and filmed this interview in a field of cows, and I sit down in the middle. And I'm just surrounded. I mean, you've seen it. I'm surrounded by these cows. And it wasn't until I was there that the farmer kind of went, "Oh, you've got to be careful because they could crush you to death." Like, oh my God.
Thanks for letting me know.
Yeah.
And it's not like one, there's like 7.
Yeah, there were lots. I mean, they just came and like surrounded us. It was strange. It's like they knew I had a book about them.
They were suspicious. Yeah. And like I was saying, it felt like a throwback to me as a teenager reading this book, because I did read a lot of fiction in my teenage years, specifically from like 11 to 16. I was a big fan of the Cherub series, the Robert Muchamore series. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
I think I read those. Are they like spy kind of books?
Yeah, I can't remember the main character, but he's about essentially him. He's orphaned, and then he goes and joins like MI6 or whatever, and he becomes like a spy essentially, and it's all about his coming of age and sort of like a James Bond, Batman, British sort of vibe to it. Yeah, because he came to our school
as well, right?
Sorry?
Kind of like the Alex Rider series too. I don't know if you read those. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, he came to our school and he was talking about that series, and it felt like a throwback to that. And it's been pretty much, I want to say a long time since I've read something like this. And I was saying to one of my family members, it was actually nice and refreshing to read something that wasn't about artificial intelligence or something really technical. It was more nice to have a little creative change. So it would be good to start with, what was your creative inspiration behind this project in particular?
That is a good question. I guess at its core, the book started as a short story called Cows Can't Jump when I was in my final year at university. And the story came from, I was reading the news. I was reading online articles just one morning, as you do, you're scrolling through. And this article popped up about cows jumping off a cliff in Switzerland. And it was like a kind of natural mystery that no one could work out why there was sort of spots along this part of the Alps where cows just seemed to be sort of mysteriously jumping or falling off. And at first I thought that's funny. Obviously, I thought that's really horrible as well. And then I kind of started thinking about maybe they were trying to save, maybe one cow fell off and the others were trying to save it. So I thought, actually, there's kind of story there as well. And there's like empathy as well as humor and a kind of dark, twisted side to it as well. So I thought, I'm going to try and write a story about the farmer. And he's really like upset about this sort of mystery cow problem that he has. And I really enjoyed it. And that part of the book is more or less exactly the same as my first draft of that story. It's really kept its original shape, surprisingly. And then from there, I kind of expanded it out. That kind of forms the center point of the book. And after I finished university, I kind of spent the next 2 years using that as my midpoint and kind of writing everything around it, which is a really bad way to write a novel, but that's how I try to do it.
It's your way of doing it.
Yeah, disorganized mess.
How did you go about expanding it from that main center point? Because that part of the book almost you read it and it is in the middle, so it is sort of like the core of the story. And how did you go about expanding it? What was your thought process?
I'm going to give away a spoiler because otherwise I don't think I can properly talk about it. So the story kind of carried up until when Billy swims across to the church in Bled. That was the end of my short story. So that was the kind of section I had to work with. I knew that that would be the climax of the novel. So I knew that I had to get Billy across Europe, meet Christoph, and then kind of fill out the journey in between. I didn't have the journey yet. I just had Switzerland, and then he kind of got to to Slovenia very quickly.
Mm.
So I knew that I kind of had to set up lots of problems for this character. He had to have a reason to go to such extreme lengths, right? To travel across Europe to end up in such a pickle, effectively, because he has no money. Why would he stay on this weird farm with a Swiss guy who he makes him kind of give birth to cows and stuff?
Mm.
It was a bit of a mess, and it took quite a few drafts, but we got there in the end. I think my very first draft, I had that as the very end of the story. So I was like, I'll write everything up to that. And I thought, no, it doesn't work. Kind of changed it again and took a few rewrites, but we got there.
Yeah, I think that reading back at it, it would have been given the story arc, it would have been perhaps a bit of a tough way to have ended the book with him just swimming across, and then like, okay, then what would have happened? Would you there or not? And or what happened? What I felt like, as someone who is a follower of current affairs, that it's almost as if you were writing that draft. Was it in between 2016 because you were feeding in the US election with Donald Trump, and you're feeding in what was happening with the migrant crisis and with Brexit? Was that on the forefront of your mind as you were writing the book in that environment?
Yeah, I think my very first draft, I would have been writing that at the end of 2015 into 2016.
Mm.
So my first draft, really, one of the biggest problems with it was that it lacked a really strong sense of place and time. It could have been set in 1999. It could have been set in 2010. So one of the reasons I ended up pulling in so many of those references was to really nail it down as this is 2016. This is the situation that Billy's going through, because I mean, as I was writing my second, third and fourth draft, we all were going through those things. So it was kind of like, that's how the celebrity deaths kind of came into it as well. I was like, God, this year's weird. So many celebrities are dying. Let me pull all of those into my timeline to give it a real strong sense of sort of time and place. I was always very interested in the 2016 migrant crisis. I mean, I spent some time in Calais with a couple of friends. We were volunteering there, and I went and interviewed quite a few different journalists and writers that were kind of following the scenes that were unfolding across Europe. So I kind of always wanted to write about that. I just never really felt comfortable until I'd sort of done lots of research, and it wasn't until probably the end of 2017 that I wrote those scenes. So it was always a long process, and retrospectively different kind of cultural and political references were added as I went. So yeah.
It's a bit of a strange one to write about if you're just sort of behind your computer and you've done a bit of research. I think that's one of those things where you have to be somewhat in the field to understand what those people are going through as you're writing that. Did that come through your mind as well?
100%. I remember sitting down and thinking, because I'd reached the point in the story where Billy is in, I think it's Croatia, where he bumps, sort of his journey comes to an abrupt stop, and it's because of a huge group of refugees are kind of blocking the road. And I remember thinking, like, I am not comfortable writing this. Like, I had the idea, I was following the news super closely and everything, but I was like, it just doesn't feel right. So soon afterwards, I was like, I really want to like go and meet people that are in this situation. So we went to Calais. I met with a guy called John Demokos, he's a filmmaker for The Guardian, and spoke with him. He made a film called We Walk Together, which is one of the biggest inspirations behind that whole section of my book. It's like a 15-minute short. He follows a group of refugees from Budapest that walked all the way to Munich. So he was a massive kind of guiding post, I guess, with that. And even now I'm still kind of like, should I have included that in the book? Yeah, it's
I think when I read it, and when I read that bit, and he forms a relationship with Yusuf and Ahmed, I think for me reading it, I think it did add a lot to the story, because what I want to read as someone who is rarely reads fiction but does, is I like inferences to real day life. So like I'm currently, you can see sort of over my left shoulder, those books are like my Dostoevsky collection. So I'm currently reading Notes from the Underground by Dostoevsky. And the thing I love about it is it has political inferences in there, because you know the time and place, and you know what was happening in Russia during the revolution under communist rule, and you understand what the political, socio-economic effects were happening at the time, and that then determines his thought process and what's happening in the story.
Yeah.
So I think it can only add to the story. And I understand it's a touchy subject as well, because you don't want to be to obviously the individuals that are going through that, when you try and express the story in the best way possible.
Definitely. I didn't want to be, that guy that's, I don't know, writing about things without doing the proper research, and I don't know. It was a tough one, but I that was the section that I probably agonized over the most, and like making sure all the details were accurate as it could be. Obviously it's still fiction, but like the standoff at Hamika was based on, something that actually happened. So I tried to make it as sort of honest and true to life as I could. And yeah, hopefully it adds a bit of, I guess it's like you said with the inferences, it adds a kind of touch of reality, and it puts Billy's problems into perspective as well. He's this kind of stupid kid, really, that has this kind of pretty profound experience, but still can't take really anything from it. Yeah. He's still kind of just like, oh, I still need to go and get this girl. So yeah, I guess it was to shine a light on the wider problems, and also to kind of shine a light on this character who is hopefully still likable, but you start to see his flaws a bit more, maybe, in those kind of things.
In the naivety, especially. I think that the thing that you just mentioned, especially when it came to the horse track, I love that part of the narrative. They go through, planning this whole thing out, and they try and execute it, and then little did they know that by doing the thing that they did, it would actually have the complete opposite effect, and they're sort of thinking that why did we think about this?
Yeah.
So how did you come across that part of the story? Was that some child inferences to that one? Did you read something about horse tracks?
So when I was at university, I lived very close to Cheltenham Racecourse, and there is a track that is described in the book where Billy and Tommy kind of set up with their air guns and shoot these horses. As for the actual idea, I can't remember where it came from. I think there's a great writer called Willie Vlautin, and he's a North American guy. He writes the most beautiful kind of simple stories, and he tends to write a lot about horses and horse racing. And there was a section in one of his books, I think it's Lean on Pete, where there's a mention of jockeys using electric whips, which shocks the horse and makes it obviously run faster. It probably came from there or thereabouts. I thought that's probably triggered the thought process for me. I was a bit worried that I'd maybe get kind of attacked by like vegans or something for that, or like animal welfare people, but thankfully it is just fiction, and no horses were harmed in the making of this story.
Well, the creative inspiration was based on cows jumping off cliffs. So, I mean...
Okay, yeah, maybe there were a few animal casualties.
Yeah, there was, but there was some births as well, so you're adding back into the population.
Yeah, it's a circular thing.
Exactly, it's a circle of life.
Yeah.
So when you were constructing the character of Billy in particular, and that narrative of sort of that naive young individual who's sort of a grave digger, and then it's sort of like it's that classic call to adventure, situation where he obviously developed a love interest and then has this opportunity to go and chase her and experience the world, essentially. What was your model for that? Because for me, that's very much sort of like a Joseph Campbell model of the hero's journey, but a flawed individual thrown in there.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't approach it probably with the kind of structural intelligence that you've already just applied to it. That I guess I knew the kind of story I was writing when I sat down and started, but the way I was kind of thinking about it was, I have a gravedigger, and I want him to go from death to life, basically, in terms of like real big structure, like as simple as it can go. And that's why Eva is called Eva, because Eva means life, right? And the first woman. So Billy goes from the graveyard, and I wanted to catapult him out of that life into love and life and color and experience, right? And then bring him back to it, because you can't have it too good for too long, right? So I kind of wanted to make it a sort of cyclical narrative, if I could sort of take him out of death into life and bring him back, but with experiences and with beauty and love, in simple terms. But yeah, the way you described it, I think is probably the better way to approach story.
I'm just interested because obviously, like we've discussed, I do read nonfiction books, but when I read fiction books, because I read The Science of Storytelling and I spoke to Will on the podcast, my mind is like, I remember I went to accounting college, after I graduated, and it was my professional qualification. I never finished it, but I remember one time I went to a class, and I love writing fiction or writing stories that have historical references. So I have this book behind me. It's called The Siege of Constantinople in 1498. And I thought, okay, how can I create a character around a real historic event and then write something about it? So I spent 2 days of this accounting course sitting at the front. I literally didn't give a crap about what anyone said to me. I just wrote 40,000 words in like 2 days.
My God.
And I've never read it back. Like, I've never read it. It's probably utter trash. But I think in the exploration of throwing in sort of real life events, I don't know, it felt like if you don't have a starting point, it's very difficult to conjure up an idea or, like you said, a time and place. And then when I did that, I thought of someone like J.K. Rowling or Tolkien. I'm like, how did they go about creating a whole new universe? It's so difficult.
Yeah, and making it kind of believable, right? That's the great kind of skill in that, that I could never do. I'd be interested to read your 40,000 words though.
I'd be interested to read it. It's sat on my laptop. Just I'm sort of mustering the courage to return to it, but I really don't want to.
I'd be scared to look at it, but you never know, like that could be great.
The idea behind it was I read so many books so my background's politics, and I read widely on history, economics, politics, sociology, these types of things. And I'm big into psychology. A lot of the nonfiction books I read is on psychology. And I thought, I have all these varied interests, and I do like reading fiction as well. Like I said, Dostoevsky. So how can I create sort of the Joseph Campbell model of the hero's journey, but make it so it's a fictional character in a real historic event? And it's that journey. And he's sort of, if I remember rightly, he's from like his father's the king, he's the prince, but he doesn't want to be a prince, but he wants to be like a soldier. And he then goes on a journey. And if I remember rightly, there is a love interest in there, but he's focused on becoming the person that his father wasn't, because he's like the comfortable king. He doesn't care about being sort of the empire building king that he wished that he was, and he sets out to do that. And I think that's where I got to.
How did you do that in 2 days?
Do you know what? I don't know. I think for me, the way that I approached it, and I haven't returned to it. It's been like 3 years. I haven't even had a look at it. It was just, I thought it was just creative inspiration more than anything. Like as a kid, I was big into cartoons. So I used to get the old Simpsons, magazines that used to get. And then I created my own storyboard and my own family of people. I've always been that way inclined, but I've I feel like as soon as I went down the nonfiction route, I went a bit too serious. And I've sort of lost that creative inspiration. And I feel like going to accounting college was so far down the uncreative path that it brought me back. It was like my way of retorting from that experience, because it was horrendous.
I mean, if you can, it sounds like you're a real structural thinker, right? And I'm not, I'm the opposite, which is why it takes me so long to kind of nail down my ideas. I just kind of, like you, write, and then kind of look back at it and go, oh my God, what have I done? But if you could approach it with that kind of structural, that sort of those ideas in place, I feel like you could, you know, the world's your oyster. You can you can do whatever you want if you've got the
True. That is true. The thing that I did like about it was the fact that when you approach nonfiction writing, so like I've currently got an idea and I've already started research for a nonfiction book. And it's more just research because, you know, I read so much that everything I read, I sort of have that at the back of my mind. Is there anything in there that I can take and apply to this nonfiction book? But there's so much research, because you want to get the right references, you want to get the right knowledge, what's too much statistics, what's not enough statistics, what's not enough references. Like when I spoke to Will, we were discussing like where's the storytelling aspect and where's the actual information that you're providing and where's the balance. Whereas I feel like with fiction writing, it's more about how your ability to delve the character and the storyline together, not so much the information that you're providing. So more time is spent constructing character than perhaps information.
Definitely.
And when I was writing, I felt like I was able to write so much because I was just pretty much just brain dumping. Like it was probably not readable in any way, shape, or form, which is probably why I haven't returned to it. But there might be some couple of sentences in there that just sort of open up the floodgates to more stuff. So when you approach writing, do you do it more out of, do you have, like with this one, you said that you had the core element of the story with the cows jumping off the cliff. When you approach the rest, was it more you wrote as you went along? Did you sort of do a storyboard? Because someone like, for instance, a nonfiction writer like Malcolm Gladwell, he basically has a short premise and then he does the research as he writes. Or you have someone else, for instance, who has the whole sort of book laid out before they approach it.
I'm not a good planner. I mean, I had the cow's story. I had the kind of the scene where Billy swims across to the church. I also had, I suppose what I had was Billy, right? And in these different situations. And I kind of had this idea about the domestic conflict fairly early on. So I knew that Billy was going to be in a pretty terrible situation with his family, with his parents. So I started from there and just kind of went with it. And I knew that I had to get him to a point where things were so bad that he kind of just went, do you know what? I'm just going to go. I'm just going to get out and go across Europe. So I guess there were these sort of loose structural checkpoints that I had in my mind. But with my earliest drafts, they were so loose that I was pretty much just gunning for it, brain dumping, which is fine because, and I kind of wish, because I feel like I've lost that a little bit now that I've sort of gone through those editorial battles and I'm a bit sort of scarred and traumatized from the process. I wish that when I approach things now, I could have that sort of creative freedom and willingness to just write everything as it comes. Mm-hmm. Because the real writing is done in the editing process anyway. Nobody's first draft is so much unless you're like the best writer in the history of the world. So I guess my approach has changed a little bit as I've sort of matured a touch. I wish that it hadn't in some ways.
Interesting point though about maintaining creative expression as a full-time creative yourself, as a writer. What do you have any processes? Do you have any systems that you employ? Like, this is my technical mind coming in. Is there any processes that you follow in order to maintain creative expression? Do you block out time? Do you go on retreats? Do you how do you do think weeks? Like, what's your creative process like?
My God. I really envy your kind of thought processes and your logical way of thinking. My process is, I guess I just try and read and watch and listen to as much as I can. I think it's the most important thing is having your eyes and your ears open, because the way I interpret and create my ideas is, you see something, you hear something, and you sort of play with that idea in your head. You think, where's the problem introduced? That's what I always come back to first. Where is the conflict? Where's the problem? And I kind of analyze where the problems come up. Where is this writer kind of introducing the issues here? And something I always do if I'm stuck is I'll sit down and write, whether it's a children's book or a script or something personal or anything. I'll just start writing, and my first sentence will be, the problem started when, and then I'll just start, because then you just get into story, because there's no story without a problem, right? there's nothing happening. There's no conflict, there's no story. So yeah, my process is kind of all over the place, I guess, but that's the way I work. I think it's the only way I'll get things done.
It's interesting because something that I think about as someone who does content creation is the way that my mind works is I'm very systematized about my process of, like, something I'm doing at the moment is all of my creative ideas when it comes to like YouTube scripts or YouTube videos. I longhand the scripts for everything and all my ideas.
Yeah.
Before I then transfer it. Do you do something similar? Do you write everything by hand before you transfer it to the computer?
Yeah. So I probably should have gone into some of that. I mean, I am constantly making notes, whether it's in my phone or in a notebook. There's a lot of that.
What benefit do you find doing that? That's because this is something that I spoke to with an author, nonfiction author, a couple of months ago. He was a former US Senate speechwriter for Chris Coons, who was the senator for Delaware before Joe Biden. After Joe Biden. So Joe Biden was before him.
Yeah.
And an idea that I had a couple of months ago was I was typing on my computer and I was typing, I think, a script or some idea or whatever. It might even be an email, I can't remember. But I was like, I'm typing, but I'm not even thinking about the words that I'm typing, like, or what the words that are coming ahead. And then I wrote a blog post on how you can type quicker than you can think.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I discussed that with him. And then we've been having this back and forth about the benefits of writing longhand as a form of creative expression or your ability to think.
I do find it helps. I always prefer really working in the physical form. I don't have a printer at home, but when I go into the office, I always prefer to print things off. I know it's bad, but it helps me kind of work through things, having that sort of tangible thing that you can hold. And I think that applies to writing things out as well. You slow down the thought process. I think that's a big part of it. Thinking about it, now you've said it, actually, pretty much all of my planning is done by hand. I can't plan on a computer or in Word or anything like that. Doesn't go in. And I think there's I did see some statistics about information, how much you can retain from reading. I think it was based on Kindles and reading paperbacks or physicals. You retain way less information on the Kindle, which I found really interesting.
Do you remember where that was?
I can't remember. So, I mean, yeah, don't quote me on that.
I was going to do some research, but I'll do some research. Kindle versus retention rates, because I'll be all over that.
I looked it up because I thought I read Trainspotting by Irvine Welsh on a Kindle. This was way back when I was in like my first or second year of uni. And 6 months, normally I'm pretty good at remembering a story and things like that. 6 months later, I was like, I can't remember like anything that happened in that. And I'd seen the film and I was like, I can remember like 2 chapters. And I kind of started looking into it. I thought, this is really strange. I don't know why. Maybe it's because, I don't know. I can't remember. I have to do the research again. But
I think my experience with a Kindle or reading, like, I don't read on like my iPad or anything like that. Sometimes authors send me ebooks and I read. The most recent one I think I read was The Lost Art of Running by Shane Benzie. He came on the podcast and he sent me an ebook. It's really difficult to get into it for me because like when you have the book, I always feel like because you have sort of 2 sides to it, you're almost immersed in it because it's something to do with your peripheral vision or something. You can feel immersed in it, where if it's just one flat screen, it's almost, you can't have that relationship with it. I think there's something tactile to it as well, the way that the words sit on the page. Yeah, it's really interesting. I get asked all the time on my 1 minute book review page, it's like, which is better, like physical books, ebooks, audiobooks? My answer is one's not better than the other. It's that it depends on what type of learner you are. Some of my family members, like my mum, she can't sit down and read a book. Like, that's not how she learns. She just wants to listen. So she listens to audiobooks. Something that I'm doing at the moment with nonfiction books, especially technical ones, it's listening and reading at the same time. Oh my God, like my comprehension and speed of reading has increased. So going back to my technical side, when I'm running experiments at the moment. So when I read, when I'm not listening, I read, let's say probably anywhere between 70 to 75 pages an hour. And I can only read for a maximum of an hour before I lose focus. I read with listening, I can increase that to about 90 minutes to 90 pages per hour. So I have like a 15 to 20 page increase, and I'm able to read for longer.
Why is that, do you think? I'd find it distracting, I think.
No, it's the opposite, because when you're reading a hard copy, or when you're reading the book, you have all these thoughts that come into your head. What I'm going to have for dinner, that person pissed me off. Oh my God, I wonder how long it takes to make hot chocolate this way. Like random things come into your head, like, as you can appreciate. But when you're listening to it, it almost locks you in, because your mind can't think of something else because it's hearing something as you're reading it. It's almost like, you're locked into the book more, because your mind doesn't have the ability to wander, because as soon as your mind wanders, you're like, oh, what's this voice in my head? And then it sort of takes you back to the book. Whereas if I don't have that, your mind is more likely to wander off.
I really want to try that, because I'm so easily distracted, which is great sometimes, but most of the time it's just fucking annoying. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, do you find that you have to focus less on actually reading it, or you kind of, does it make you kind of focus even more on the words?
It makes me focus even more. Like, I'm a big note taker anyway. When I read my books, like, this is my note taking book. So I go properly into the book when I do my nonfiction books, and I take long hand notes and everything, similar to the way I journal and everything. Like, I do at the end of each chapter and highlight and do all that. But what I've found with listening and reading at the same time is you can follow the words on the page, but there's something about listening to the author that adds color to the book, especially for a nonfiction book, because then the author's voice in your head almost feels like they're there explaining to you. And when you go into a book, let's say on a technical book like artificial intelligence, or like a particular skill or productivity book, it's almost like you're in a lecture and you're reading the book at the same time.
Yeah,
it's really it's something that I came across, but I've been talking with some friends, and apparently it's all over Quora, and I'm not on Quora. People are like, I need to get on Quora. It's like a board where people ask questions and people answer it, and they can like a following. Never been on it. I try and limit my social media usage, really, because it's a web of crap and there's some good stuff in between. But yeah, it's interesting. You should try it. I mean, I don't know how it would work for fiction, but I don't really know. Potentially it adds to the story, because I know audiobooks are huge in the fiction world.
That's the point. I think it would maybe sometimes help with, if you're reading a really challenging text, or maybe a text from, say, Notes from the Underground, from a different era where, you know, things can be interpreted so differently and it's a completely new sort of cultural landscape. It might help with things like that, because if you get the kind of interludes from the dialogue and the way that the narrator says things would help with understanding in that way, it'd be an interesting experiment. Maybe you could be the or I could be the guinea pig. I could be the guinea pig for the fiction, maybe.
Well, it's interesting because I did research. So there's a book behind me that I've sort of dabbled with, which I've turned my head. It's The History of the Russian Revolution by Leon Trotsky. I've always wanted to get into it. It's like 850 pages, and it's like a famous expose. Expose is not the right word. It's a famous
exclusive.
exclusive.
Yeah.
Into the Russian Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution. And I studied it at school, but I was looking to find an audiobook. I couldn't find one. Like, there's just not one out there by anyone. And then I thought to myself, well, who in their right mind would want to read 800 pages of the Russian Revolution and do an audiobook on it?
Actually,
Yes, I thought it was surprising considering it came out in the 1920s and no one's got around to doing it. But I'm not going to be the person to do it.
well, yeah, it might take a couple of years.
yeah, I don't want to do that. I thought to myself, imagine if I was reading your book and I had Ed in my head. I don't know how that would
say
the book.
I might try that.
Yeah, see how it adds to it. So yeah. I actually thought what it'd be like to read like Lord of the Rings or one of those books. I don't know if they've got audiobooks for those. I'm assuming they have.
I'd be really surprised if they don't, but you never know.
You never know because they're long. They're long books.
Yeah, they are. I mean, really feel like I saw a platform recently that offers books digitally and in audio, and you pay one price.
I haven't heard of it.
I need to look it up and I'll send you the link because I mean, that sounds perfect for you.
It does. But it's like, I want everything. I'm not one of those. I'm like, I just want every single form of medium of a way of learning. Yeah, it's one of those things for me. Like at the moment, I said to you, I'm learning sort of coding, and the way that I'm approaching it is it's just another. It's not just another language, just like another way to learn. It's nothing different to if you were to read like a nonfiction book or anything differently. But it's like, how do I approach it? Because there's like online courses, there's books, but a lot of the time it's just how you approach the actual application of the knowledge rather than the knowledge itself, and finding practical applications of that knowledge, which is interesting to me. And I'd actually like to talk to you actually about how do you approach reading widely? What types of books do you read? Do you read just fiction, non-fiction, current affairs? What does your reading look like usually?
I try and vary up as much as I can. I mean, right now I don't have really, I'm just working like all the time. So I'm not, oh no, I'm reading on Writing by Stephen King at the minute.
Oh, nice. I've always wanted to get into that. Is it good?
Yeah, it's really good. And it's kind of, obviously he's talking about the process and, you know, his career as one of the most successful writers of all time, probably. Interestingly, I've never read anything else by him, so I just thought I'd give it a try. But generally, my split is probably 80-20, with 80% being fiction. Most recently, this kind of nonfiction I read is more kind of historical, rather than, I guess, much of yours would be kind of productivity and technical kind of structural things like that. Probably do with reading a lot of that stuff and learning some of these things. But as you mentioned earlier about writing historical fiction, it's something that I would love to do. So I'm kind of trying to add as much historical nonfiction as I can right now.
Any particular era that you like to read?
It would be way too challenging for me for where I'm at now, but kind of 17th century London really fascinates me.
Okay.
I've just read a book called Mudlarking, which is, do you know what mudlarking is?
I don't. Please tell me.
No, it's kind of a weird thing.
I love weird stuff. What is it?
Yeah, it's pretty weird. It was a really popular book a couple of years ago. It's by a woman called Laura Macklime, and she basically goes along the foreshore of the River Thames in London, and when the tide's out, because it's so strong, it pulls back kind of layers of this foreshore, and she can find all kinds of things. And it's just like, I think it's really growing in popularity in sort of the last 20 to 30 years. But they've found things from kind of, you know, obviously Roman all the way through, basically. They found like Viking shields in there and stuff like that. So I read that and it kind of gave me this picture of London that I'd never had before. I mean, I've lived here for like 5 years, but you don't really think about the things you're walking around and the things that have gone before. And the section that she did about 17th century London and the South Bank and the things that they found there, and the South Bank being this kind of hub of entertainment and debauchery and like all the things that shouldn't be happening within the city walls, that really like resonated with me. I mean, I lived in that part of the city for a couple of years. So I know it really well.
Mm.
And then that kind of gave me this added like color and historical flavor that I was like, oh, I'd love to set a story in 17th century sort of South Bank London, but don't think I'm quite ready yet. I have this kind of dream of doing a master's in history when I'm like a grandpa, and then maybe trying to tackle my historical novel then. But in terms of my general reading, it goes a lot on recommendations, and it can really, I don't think it follows a pattern as such. It does sort of chop and change, and I'll often revisit things that I like, and read again.
That historical fiction is something that I've had in the back of my mind for a couple of years now. I don't know. It seems like we're both really passionate about it, which is interesting. I didn't think we both would be, but it's an interesting point of conversation. What is it in particular? Because I know we've talked about it briefly, but the reason that I like historical fiction is the fact that you can construct a story around it, in a nice way, from a fixed point in time. So it's almost easy to construct the story, like we've been discussing before. But I feel like it's an opportunity for the author to learn as they're telling the story, because the more that they learn through the history and reading widely, it's almost like they're exposing the history as well as the character, and it's finding a divide between fiction and nonfiction.
I couldn't have put it better myself, really. um, yeah, I think I love history. I've always loved learning about history, and particularly the history of London. I love, and I'm a bit of a nerd for war history too. I think one of the things from a kind of fiction writer's perspective that I love about historical fiction is the specific details that any writing requires to be good writing. The kind of concrete nouns that you'd find in historical fiction, they're so much more kind of rich. The things that you would use to describe 17th century London would be, there were thousands of water boats, effectively like taxis, because there was only one bridge. So the kind of specific details that come with little things like that, I think from a kind of aesthetic point of view as a fiction writer, really appeals to me, because I think, oh, that would be such a nice thing to describe. And also it does solve that problem, like I had with cows. It was, when do I set this thing? If you have that set in stone for someone like me, it kind of makes life easier. What is it for you that, I mean, besides bridging the gap between nonfiction and fiction, why is
it's very similar to you in the fact that I have a deep level of interest into the history. I studied at school, I studied at university, when I studied politics, economics. I don't know why they're different subjects. I know why they're different subjects, but it's so intertwined. Politics, economics, history, sociology, anthropology, like that you can't really do one without the other. I almost think social science, you should just do a social sciences degree where you just do everything.
Yeah.
And it should be like 5 to 7 years instead of 3 years. And you just study all the subjects, and then you come out with just this wealth of knowledge. Something I've been thinking about really is, education systems, and what I learnt at university and where the flaws were in the education system, which I wish that I had. And, I was fortunate enough to go to a good school, but then, when I went to university, I felt like there was a massive divide in the hands-off approach, which I think is good and it's bad in a way. Going back to your question about historical fiction before I start ranting about education systems, is the fact that for me, it's when you have a set place and time, I feel like you can expose the truth behind an event or a place in history, which perhaps people don't know about.
Yeah.
So like for me, I don't know how many people know about the siege of Constantinople in 1498. I think it is hardly anyone.
Couldn't tell you anything, I don't think.
Exactly. So it's a way to speak about a real historical event in a way that can captivate people through an actual narrative.
Yeah.
Like one of my favorite movies, and I don't know why it's one of my favorite movies, but it's Troy with Brad Pitt. And It's only because I studied the mythology and I loved the storytelling of watching that, because I knew the actual mythology and the story behind it, but I liked the way that it was set in that movie. And I love films like that. You know, I know it's mythology, so it's sort of fiction. It's like, and it's a real historical event, but obviously over time, you don't know how much of it is true. I mean,
Yeah.
who knows? Like, no one knows. It's one of those things where you never know these things. But the story, everyone knows the Trojan horse. Like, that's just a concept in business. People know what a Trojan horse is, and in storytelling, everyone knows what a Trojan horse is. And those fundamental truths, I love when it comes to describing storytelling, because you know, you wrote about it in Cows, is the idea of the journey of the flawed individual, and then returning after this experience, really wanting and seeking a better life, or a better version of themselves, and they come back and it's almost like nothing's changed, but everything's changed at the same time. And
Yeah.
unpeeling that in a way that shrouded in a real historical event is really appealing to me. I mean, I love the fact that we're both interested in this, because I've never really got the opportunity to talk about it. Like, I've never talked really about that 20,000 words that I've written,
Oh,
like
really?
with anyone. Yeah. Like, I'm one of those people, Phil, that I read a nonfiction book and I don't proselytize it really to my friends and family. That's why I love my social media, because I can talk about all I want, and then I sort of get out my system, and then
Well,
don't have to do it.
maybe we should go through it.
Perhaps,
We open
maybe.
that document, open the demons.
I need to. I think this conversation has inspired me to look back at it and perhaps uncover something that perhaps, you know, I'm big on journaling ideas, journaling my thoughts. And a couple of weeks ago, I was tidying up my room, and I found loads of journals about my cupboard, and I was sort of storing them away. And I was like, okay, let's have a read through these. And they're from when I started my grad scheme, so 2016, end of 2016, early 2017. What I found interesting was that the things that I was thinking about 4 or 5 years ago now, wow, they're pretty much the same.
Are you going to
Which
tell me
is
what they are?
they're like huge concepts, similar to what you were talking about in, do you know what I just said about fundamental truths?
Yeah.
Something that I like to talk about. You know, I was getting engaged at the time, and that's no longer a thing now. Like, we broke it off, and it was one of those things like, what was my thought process during that time? What was I experiencing? New things that I'm experiencing, new jobs, new grad schemes. Why am I doing these things? Why am I making these decisions? What is the meaning of my choice in the things that I'm doing? Like, really high level things. And as I read back to it, I'm like, wow, I actually had a really deep thought process. And I think if you can chronologically document that over time in the way that people do with vlogs as well, like, I love the idea of doing a personal vlog when you don't share it on YouTube in like a self-egotistical way, like, look what I had for breakfast. But if if you just film yourself and then create a bank of video that you can always go back to and watch, I think that's amazing. Because, like, imagine if your grandparents or great grandparents had all that ability to record their
Yeah.
life, and then you just have this treasure trove of video that you could go back and watch. Imagine.
Yeah, that's a really cool thought, actually. I mean, I see everything every day, people talking about journaling, and I've never done it. And I feel like I probably should. I think it would
Mm.
probably benefit the writing process in so many different ways. Do you feel like do you journal every day? Is it something you've done for years? Do you think
Yeah.
do you feel like that would benefit your writing process if you were to attempt the Constantinople?
So there's a couple of things I do when it comes to journaling. My personal journaling is separate to ideas and content. So if we're going to go down my ridiculous systemized route for everything that I do, my writing content creation is scheduled. And, you know, it's like I have like an ideas booklet, like one of those small booklets. I don't know where it is, but I just kind of carry it around. If I have an idea, like if I just go before bed or something and I don't want to write down a thing, I just like bullet point an idea, and then I revisit that every couple of days. And I'm like, okay, cool. What do I want to pursue? What do I not want to pursue?
Yeah.
And then when I have a scheduled content writing block in my diary, I can then say, okay, I wanted to pursue this. Let's write about this in more depth. That's like content creation, writing ideas, blog ideas, newsletter ideas, like whatever. It's just ideas for the magazine, whatever it might be, or just general thoughts when it comes to creative expression. But like my journal, which is like my personal thoughts, is something I do right before bed. So like I have a very strict evening routine and morning routine. And my evening routine is, before I go to bed, my notebook's on my bedstand, and I have one of those dimmable lights. So my bedtime's at like 10 o'clock, and then for 30 minutes, it sort of gradually reduces to increase melatonin, and it helps you go to sleep, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And the journal's there because what I was finding is, like, I have, like many people who are sort of creative, but are come up with ideas, and your brain's always working. And I thought, how can I not get, I call it granddad syndrome, because my granddad, I bless him, he's like in his mid 80s. He's had stroke, he's got diabetes, and he's when you think of entrepreneur, you think of my granddad, because after all that stuff, he can barely walk, and he still calls me wanting to talk about new business ideas that he's had. And I'm like, but what are you going to do? There's nothing you could do with this. Like, you have no capital, like you have nothing. He's like, oh no, it's just an idea. I've been thinking about it, getting up in the middle of the night. And I thought to myself, that's not healthy. And I thought, okay, how can because I was finding myself doing that, like getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning and just having this just like thought about what's going on. And I found writing anything before I go to sleep is sort of like a brain dump before I'm able to go to sleep. And then when I get up, it's almost, you get up with a clear head, because sometimes you go to sleep and you've got an idea in your head and you get up and the idea is still there, but you haven't been able to solve the idea in a way. Like if you read the book Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker, he says that your synaptic energy in your brain is firing to a similar degree as you're awake, because your memory is actually your memories are being created and the neural synaptic networks are being creating as you sleep. That's why you actually memorize stuff when you're sleeping. That's why it's so important to sleep correctly, because you actually learn things, pattern recognitions through the day, that those connections are being made when you sleep.
Wow.
So when you actually write out those ideas, that's why the classic saying is sleep on it, because it actually helps. So if you're able to get those ideas down on paper and then you go to sleep, you almost get up in the day and you're able to get up in the morning. And I've had it since I've done it, really, like I've really formed a strict routine. That's why I wanted to talk to you about this as a creative yourself, is those ideas, they'll just come to me in, like, when I'm washing the dishes and I'm like, I haven't thought about this for a couple of weeks, but it's been working in the back of my mind because I was able to write it down. So yeah, that's my technical process. It's kind of,
I need some of that in my life, I think.
I don't know who it was, but I recently bought this book. It's fascinating. It's called Daily Rituals. How Great Minds Make Time and Find Inspiration and Get to Work. It's like a look at creatives through time and their daily rituals and their daily, how they went about approaching from a creative point of view. And I just started it a couple of days ago, and it's amazing how different people had different ways of approaching it. There's no right or wrong way. One of the ones that stood out to me, it actually wasn't in the book, but someone that I read about was Hunter S. Thompson and his famous routine of, staying up until like 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, and then waking up, doing cocaine, drinking, doing cocaine, drinking, doing cocaine, drinking. Like as soon as he got up, smoking weed, and then like just all over the place.
My routine looked kind of better now.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's an interesting concept for me.
I forgot to mention, actually, one of the biggest factors that I'd be interested to know if it features in that book is walking. That's like the main time probably that I process my ideas, and that I didn't mention earlier. So I just thought I'd chuck that in as well, because I feel like when you especially when you don't take headphones or you completely switch off. I used to, like before lockdown, I was walking to work and back, which was like 10 miles a day. And I was like finding that my ideas and my work was actually a hell of a lot better. And I couldn't really pinpoint it for a while. And I was like, actually, I'm just kind of, spending this time before and after work, like preparing in the morning when I'm going in, I'm thinking about, whatever I'm working on, the story, how I want it to look. and then getting there and kind of having the idea in my head formed, and you've walked it out and it's there. And then afterwards you kind of decompress and you kind of think about the next steps. Obviously I'm not thinking about work the whole time I'm walking in and walking back, but I definitely think that walking is a huge part of my process that I failed to mention earlier.
That's a constant theme that I've been seeing amongst creatives and especially writers.
Really?
Yeah,
I'm not
huge
surprised.
thing in their routine. I don't know who it was in particular. I know that I think it was Jung who had a tower, Bollington Tower in Switzerland, where he would go there at 6 o'clock in the morning and start working. And then in the afternoon, he would walk for 3 hours in the Swiss Alps. Sounds nice.
That's
Not bad,
nice.
not a bad life. And then he'll return to then work and construct the ideas, because he was basically trying to come to a counter argument to Freud. So it's like Jung and Freud, Jungian theory and Freudian theory, and he basically used that routine in order to compete with Freudian psychoanalysis. So yeah, definitely. Like, I've found walking to be really helpful. Like, do you go at the same time every day now? Like, I go at 3 o'clock.
Again, see you with the structure, man, every time.
You got to get it. Like, I'm telling you, it's where it's at. It's where it's at.
I'm much more of an ad hoc, to be honest. I'm just super busy. So I'm just like, I go for a 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, and 1 at night. So I kind of have the structure, but it's a little bit more malleable, maybe. I really like your way of doing things like ding, 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 ding.
I find I'm not a procrastinator at all. Like, that's not my style, but I am if there's something that I really want to do, I really want to do it, and I'll just throw everything else out the window just to do it.
Yeah.
Like I said, this coding thing is something that I'm really interested in, and like, I could easily just spend the whole day doing it and then not get anything I want to get done. So being very structured with my day is a great way, and my weeks and my months is really helped me to find out what I'm doing. When, especially, we were discussing this about owning your own business and structuring your own time. When no one's telling you what you're supposed to do at every single time, you almost need to, to quote the analogy in 12 Rules for Life by Jordan B. Peterson, one of the rules in there is treat yourself as if you're someone that you're responsible for looking after. This idea that we always treat others better than we treat ourselves. And I use my structure as sort of like a personal PA for myself.
That's a nice way of thinking about it, actually.
Yeah. The way I think about it is, when as a kid I was big into playing GTA. I got my anger out through playing GTA on my PSP. Do you remember PSPs?
Yeah, wow.
I used to play.
My God.
I used to play. I don't know. Was it Vice City? I think on my PSP, and you do the cheat codes, and the tanks would drop from the sky. They'd get to 5 stars like within 30 seconds. Used to love it. But on that, I always imagine myself. You'd have the character, and you could sort of, the camera was behind, or the view was behind the character, and you could sort of see them going through life. I almost see myself as that. Like, I don't see myself as the individual walking through life through my own eyes. I'm like, what would it be like to be the person behind me? How would I direct myself as if I was controlling myself by a third party?
That's kind of a scary way for me to think. That's an interesting way of thinking about it, actually. I might try that today. I'll let you know how I get on.
It's something that it's interesting. When I went back and had a look at my writings, it's something to be a key theme. Not self-control, self-awareness, how you go about approaching your life, but also your day. And this is where I feel like I recently had Veronica O'Keefe, who's a psychiatrist at Trinity College, on the podcast. She was on the last episode, and we were talking about like memory formation and consciousness, and real high, like super intelligent. She's been doing it for 35 years, and I was lost, really. Like, and in her book, she talks about the idea of like memory formation, and interwoven in that, she's a big literary buff. So like, she talks about how in literature, especially in the 17, 18, 1900s, they were talking about psychological mental illness before it was even a scientific thing. Like, there's no technology to measure it, but then they were talking about mental illness, and whether it's anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, those big topics, but they were doing it in a literary way, which was fascinating to me.
Yeah, that again comes back to the historical fiction, doesn't it?
It does. I feel like we're gonna talk about this more in depth. I feel like in the coming years about our journeys into historical fiction. Watch out, people! It's
Yeah.
coming. It's coming. There's going to be one on 17th century, 1700s London, and there's going to be one on 1498 in Constantinople.
Yeah.
On the way in 2030.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, if a few years of research.
It'll come about. But I think it's a really interesting topic, the idea of the finding a bridge between fiction and nonfiction. That's something that's really a mission of Book Talk today. You know, I have the 1 Minute Book Review page, which is solely nonfiction books, but I'm really interested in the divide because it seems like people are like, oh, I either like fiction or I like nonfiction.
Yeah.
And whereas that's just, there has to be a way to find a balance between that.
I love creative nonfiction. I mean, have you read much of John Ronson?
The Men Who Stare at Goats. I watched the movie the other day again.
Yeah, we spoke about this actually. Sorry.
Yeah, because Will he interviewed him when he was a journalist. He interviewed John Ronson and he went to his house and he talks about it in his book.
Yeah.
That he interviewed him. And yeah, sorry, you were saying.
Well, stuff like that again as a bridge. John Ronson's stuff is great. So like, you know, you get that narrative, but also he pulls in all of this amazing kind of information and you learn so much reading his books. So sort of creative or narrative nonfiction is one of my favorites to read. And I'd be very open to recommendations if you if you have any.
Definitely. I think for me, I think journalists are very interesting in the way that they approach writing, because long form journalism is really interesting to me.
Yeah.
I'm not big on reading current affairs, studied politics, but I hate reading current affairs because it's like, what changes in 2 weeks? Like that's something about history. Once you read history, you realize over a span of 500 years, a lot changes, but also humans don't change. So when you're reading current affairs, you think to yourself, okay, political events have meaning, but do they actually have meaning? Where does it sit in the bigger picture? So, but within that is the idea of, I've found journalists have a great way of approaching writing, and long form journalism, like your John Ronsons, your Will Storrs, your David Epsteins, Malcolm Gladwell. These writers write descriptive, informative pieces of work that are interwoven with narrative and compelling storytelling. And it's almost like I almost feels like an untapped genre.
It is. And that's why I said, have you got, you know, if you have any recommendation, because I kind of struggle to I'm sure that it's out there, but it's rare that I find a book like that really grabs me, as in there aren't that many out there. Have you read So You've Been Publicly Shamed by John Ronson? That's another, like, so it's all about social media and public shaming and how kind of the history of public shaming and the psychology behind it has sort of translated into social media and how it kind of works, and some really sort of horrifying examples of it. But I think you'd really, really like that book. Yeah,
definitely. I actually read Will has a book called Selfie, which does something very similar to that. So yeah, I love stuff like that. Reading stuff like that. And I always have people I posted a photo yesterday about the psychology of money. It's a finance book, and I hate the word self-development, self-improvement, self-help. I was having a conversation with someone and I said to them, I'm like, there's stages of my dislike. So self-development, I can sort of like, I can sort of, that's okay. I can take that. Self-improvement, not so much. Self-help, don't come with me with that self-help book BS. Like I hate when people say, oh, you only read self-help books. I'm like, what is self-help? Because like the way I see it is drinking water is self-help. Eating is self-help. Like when you read a book, it's not self-help. It's a genre of a book.
It's kind of patronizing. Self-help is like you need development makes more sense. How would you kind of categorize it? I guess it's just nonfiction, right?
Nonfiction, and then it's split into genres. For instance, you have psychology, you have finance, you have habit formation, you have contemporary journalism. That's what I like to call sort of Will Storr's books, Malcolm Gladwell's, David Epstein's, it's contemporary journalism. But, people love labels. It's easy. Yeah, imagine you just create a new genre of contemporary journalism, and we've created a new genre today, which I'm super excited about. I'm super excited about our conversation and our relationship between history and fiction.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Let's see how that goes. Pending. So to end up, like, I think we've covered so many topics in this conversation. It's been great. It's been a wonderful learning opportunity. I wanted to touch upon, this is your debut novel. So I know a lot of our listeners and a lot of my followers are budding writers. Whether they're studying creative writing at university, or they're people like me that just do it out of interest. What would be your best advice for someone who wants to write more, or potentially go down the route of getting their first debut novel published? What would be sort of your 3 pieces of advice if you had to whittle it down to 3?
That is tough. I mean, for me, if you're just looking to write more, what works best for me is just setting a timer. I do 20 minutes and I set it on my phone. I set an alarm to go off in 20 minutes and I put my phone across to the side of the room and I just write for those 20 minutes. Helps to have an idea. But if you don't, free writing is great too. You just sit for 20 minutes and, like we were talking about earlier, brain dump, or, just let the words flow onto the page however you can. So that's a really great tip for me that works for just kind of idea generation and I guess getting into a story. In terms of getting published, the best and the only advice I could really give is just to keep slogging it and just keep carving out opportunities, enter competitions. I obviously, every writer gets a bunch of rejections. I had, tons of rejections before I got published. But the things that helped me were entering competitions. I was lucky enough that the book won like the Spotlight First Novel Prize. Through that, I won like a mentoring kind of package with a really great writer called Ray Robinson. And together we kind of worked on the book, and we carved out themes and pulled out a few more scenes to make them, kind of punch a bit better. And, use the resources that you have are just unbelievable. You have to dig a bit, but online there are amazing websites for like independent publishers in the UK. There's a list that you can submit to. There's a website called Jericho Writers where you can find agents and search, within your genre for the kind of agent you're looking for and submit to them. Mm-hmm. YouTube is great. You can listen to people speak on their work and your podcast and things like that. So give it a plug.
Thank you very much.
So really, I mean, for me, it took from conception to publication 5 years, just about. Well, 4 years. So it's a long game, especially as an unknown like debut. You've just got to keep going with it and try and find as many opportunities as you can and meet people that you can learn from. That's really as much advice as I can offer.
I think the grit element is powerful. Like Angela Duckworth's book, and that she talks about resilience and persistence and, pursuing your desired goal in the face of adversity. And, there's countless books that I've read that are on that theme, but that theme remains true. And it's interesting, like we were saying, like the truisms of life, overcoming obstacles, being persistent. But also the counter to that is, when does your persistence actually lead to negative consequences? And having that balance is something that's fascinating to me. Is when do you get to that point where your persistence is actually hampering you instead of benefiting you?
I definitely was at that point. I'd had the book on submission. I mean, I finished it to a good standard by the end of 2018, just about. And I'd had it on submission for a while, and a publisher basically said, yeah, we'd love to publish it. And I was over the moon, but they kind of said, we just have these, a bunch of editorial things that we'd like you to work through, and then send us the book again. But they'd pretty much said they were going to publish it. So, I mean, there was nothing written, but I'd kind of taken that as, yes, this is happening. And And they'd even said, oh, we wouldn't normally provide this kind of editorial guidance for books that we didn't want to publish. So I was like, great, let me do these edits, get it back to them, and it's a done deal. So it took me a good 4 or 5 months to make all the changes. I went back, didn't hear anything. I followed up, didn't hear anything. Third time, they sort of said, we're not quite in a position to take on any more books right now. Quite a small publisher. By the time that had happened, I'd lost 9 months because I thought, this is a done deal. So after that point, I was so close to giving up. So fed up because you get messed around, you get obviously rejections. So it took me a little while to get back on my feet after that and kind of get that grit back and get back onto the submissions horse.
What got you back?
I guess the horror of wasting all that time, and I'd put so much heart into the book, and I genuinely believed in it, and I thought that it was something that people could enjoy. I thought it would serve people. I thought they'd find pleasure in it. And I just kind of thought there's no point coming this far, getting knocked back to not push through and go again. And there were, even after that, there were a couple more sort of close shaves and nearly moments. But we got there.
Sunk cost bias.
Yeah, that's exactly. Exactly.
At least it worked out well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think I said to myself, I gave myself until the end of 2020. And after that point, I thought if it's not meant to be. That would have been 2 years on submission, I think. And luckily at the sort of start of 2020, I got my acceptance. So it was, about 12, 15 months on submission, which, I mean, actually isn't that long. Like as a debut, it feels like a lifetime, but it's not too bad. It can take years to get a book published. And even from the submissions point of view, you can be submitting it for years and years because people don't know who you are, and, it's hard.
Well, congrats to getting it published, and I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. I want to quickly mention one thing though. In your piece of advice, you mentioned that you put a timer there for 20 minutes and then you write. You essentially are doing what I do, but you just don't schedule it into your calendar. So you put the time in, but you write, but then you say you're not structured. I'm like, does he realize that he's doing the same thing as I'm doing? So
true. It's because
I know that he's doing it.
I'm not a structural thinker. I really struggle with structure. I think I have my own sort of micro structures. I think you're probably good at seeing the macro, and you can see how your day is maybe in blocks. I see it as, right, I've got 20 minutes timer, and it's a bit more ad hoc. So I guess you're right. I do have micro structures.
I'd be interested to see how you could organize your time in a way that those microstructures become integrated into your schedule, so that I get to a point where now that when 3 o'clock rolls around and it's walking time, sometimes I almost automatically get ready for it, even though it's not in my mind to do it, if that makes sense. It's not like, oh my god, 3 o'clock's now, I need to go. It's become part of my routine where I'm just start to get ready, and I'm like, oh, weird. Like when I get up, like as soon as I get up, I usually just start reading. So that's my reading time, anywhere between 5:30 to 7:30 is my reading time. And it's just like clockwork now. It's just, and then you're done. So I'll be interested to see how you're able to find those blocks, and how there's a way that you can integrate that into sort of a daily, weekly, and then how that changes your creative process.
Yeah, I think it would really help me. I think the thing that I'd struggle with is that my day is so changeable, and there are multiple things going on. I have different projects on the go, so I could get an email that would require me to action something right now, which might, but I can definitely improve. I can definitely improve my stress.
That's another conversation for us to have.
I need your help on this. Yeah.
That is another conversation. We won't get into that, because I actually had a friend call me the other day, and I hadn't spoken to him in a while, and he's been wanting for advice about how he structures his time. And I was explaining to her, and I don't talk to anyone about it. I'm not a coach. Like, I don't approach my life as a coach. Everything I do selfishly really is just for myself. And then if anyone wants to know, they can call me and we can have a conversation. But I don't approach it as a like I know everything kind of way. But
Yeah.
I was on the call with him, and I think we were nearly on 2 hours, and I was explaining to him, I'm like, oh my God, I actually put a lot of thought behind this.
Yeah.
A lot of thought behind this. And I only realized it once I was explaining to him. I'm like, I'm walking through this process and I can see his mind like thinking, oh my God, like, how do I do this? And for me, it's just the way that I do it. It's just my life.
Yeah.
But obviously it's taken a lot of time to get here, but yeah, I would love to sit down and
You should
discuss that.
you should be a structure coach.
My mum says that to me. She's like, you've got all this information, and she gets annoyed when I give it away free. But that's not my goal. Is not to be a coach. That's not where the career trajectory that I want. And everyone's a coach now. I'm like, bollocks to that. It's like, how can I implement that to do things like create an app or run a business or run my own life or these kind of things. It's not to be a quote unquote coach. That's not my goal in life. If I can help people with the advice with the knowledge that I've gained, then I'm more than happy to do that. But I'm not going to do it under the label of life coach. It's like self-help. It's
I was going to say, yeah, it's in that category.
It's just, I don't want to become one of those people because people. Oh no, don't go that dirty. People love to put you in boxes like we've been talking about with fiction and non-fiction writers. And that's why I'm very careful about the projects that I take on, because as soon as you give yourself a label, people like to put you in boxes. Like, people love to call me a book reviewer. I'm like,
really?
Book reviewer. Like I had a conversation with a publisher and they were like, you're the best book reviewer we know. And I'm like, okay. Like, I don't consider myself to be. And then people call me an influencer, which is that's even worse. I detest that word. Just because as soon as you call yourself something, people just reiterate that back to you. So I don't ever want to be using those words about myself to other people, because then they'll just reinforce that. And in that reinforcing, then you become that. So I at every moment when someone calls me an influencer, I'm like, nope, I'm not an influencer. Don't worry.
Yeah. It's a good way to be. Don't get pinned down.
Keep your options open. Anyway, Phil, it was a pleasure to have you on. We covered loads of different topics and super excited. Thank you so much for sending your book. His debut novel, Cows Can't Jump. Highly recommend it. As someone who loves reading nonfiction, I felt like this was a great change in my reading schedule, and I thoroughly enjoyed speaking to you, Phil. Where can people find you? What's the best place to find you? Social, website?
Yeah, so my website is just philipbowne.com, nice and simple. On Instagram, I'm Philip Bowne. And on Twitter, I'm called Chumpy Bloke, which is a childhood nickname.
Okay. I'd love to know the origins.
I don't know.
Like tuna.
Yeah.
I love that, by the way.
That was one of my own narrative hooks. I was like, I need to get people through this book somehow. No, Chumpy Bloke was just something my dad called me, and it sort of seemed funny when I made my Twitter account. I think it was 2009 I created my account. So going back a while, I was pretty young, and it's sort of stuck. I think that's it. Yeah, that's the places you can find me. If you want to read or on any other sort of book related, like bookshop.org, you can find me on there as well.
Great. Thanks so much for coming on, Phil.
Thank you very much for having me. That's good fun.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content. Also, visit our website, www.booktalktoday.com, to subscribe and download the latest edition of our magazine. Join our mailing list to receive the first issue for free, to get a taste for the value-packed content that we are offering. Book Talk Today, for readers, by readers.